Hello and welcome back to the Marathon HSC podcast, the podcast dedicated to senior high school students undertaking the HSC. I'm your host, Sarah, and this is episode 3 of season 1, the English series on the common module Texts and Human Experiences. This is our first episode in 2024, so we're welcoming it with open arms, as I hope you are too. So here's to an amazing 2024. Bring it on. Today, I'll be giving you all my top tips for short answer questions that I personally had to figure out on my own. When I was in Year 12, it took me almost the entire year to get a grip on what short answer questions were really asking. So I totally understand the confusion that comes with implementing the key components of an awesome short answer question response. Until I finally found it. I'd like to send a quick reminder though to clarify that this content is all applicable to Year 12 Standard and Advanced, so if that's you, welcome aboard. Now, your short answer questions are the very first part of your very first paper, so it's section 1 of English Paper 1, where you'll be applying this. 1/5 of your overall HSC examination mark for English comes from the short answer question section, which is equivalent to each of your essay sections, so the equivalent of a singular essay. So these are just as important, if not of even higher importance than the other sections. The reason being, by the time you're writing your essays and your exams, you will have covered the content through and through, time and time again, to the point where answering an essay question is an easier ask. But with your short answer questions, these are unseen texts you've never read or seen before, so you have to have a solid understanding of the foundations of each text. Let's begin. First things first, learn to distinguish between the different categories of techniques and know them like you know your name. You've probably been taught about some of the important techniques before, similes, metaphors, onomatopoeia, and the like. But have you ever thought about how many categories of techniques there are? Let me break them down for you. You've got your visual techniques for images, your written techniques for written texts like short stories, novels, novellas, poetic techniques for poems, theatrical techniques for plays, film techniques for all sorts of films, whether that's documentaries, docudramas, movies, and backbone techniques, which are your go-to techniques for short answer questions. I'm going to be breaking these down today, but there are only so many techniques I can go through in one episode, and I don't want to bore you all with their names, so what I'm going to do is go through the key and essential techniques, and I'll leave the link to the full list of techniques you need to learn in the show notes. And in case that doesn't work, I'll also have it posted on the Marathon HSC website. Now, starting with visual techniques, there are various visual texts you'll need to apply these to, from pictures to painting to magazines, posters, advertisements. There's a lot to cover. Your job is to learn the different visual techniques, and I'm here to make that easy for you. The main visual techniques are color and how that influences the mood of the image, lighting and how the presence, absence, dimness, brightness impact how we observe images, perspective, i.e. what point of view, what angle the visual is in, contrast, in colors, shapes, sizes, can draw attention to specific elements, framing, such as close-ups or wide shots, can evoke different emotions, and guide the viewer's focus. Next, we have written techniques for your written texts. Again, these are short stories, novellas, novels, non-fiction, and fictional texts. Your main written techniques are similes and metaphors, so your comparisons that draw parallels between two unlike things. Metaphors are phrases that state that one thing is another, while similes use like or as to make comparisons. You've got symbolism to represent ideas, themes, concepts beyond their literal meaning. Alliteration, where we repeat consonant sounds, for the example, the letter B in Busy Bee's Buzz. Personification, where we give human qualities to non-humans. Foreshadowing, the future by hinting at it in the story. And hyperbole, to exaggerate statements. Finally, I want to speak on a crowd favorite, and that's the ruthless imagery. And I say this because it's a technique we all learned in junior high school, where we use the 5 senses, to enhance our writing. But now that we're all past that stage, I want you all to understand why we no longer use imagery as a technique. You see, imagery is what every technique aims to do. Every single technique serves mainly to help you picture and visualize what the author or playwright is talking about in an easier way. The adjectives used are what help push the narratives forward and are what cause the imagery in the first place. So my point is, we have better ways to describe what we may know as imagery, since imagery is just what every technique gives us as readers. Vivid mental images and an enhancement of that, reader experience. Number 3 for our technique categories is poetic techniques, which you see in poems. Your main poetic techniques are, rhyme, rhythm, and meter. So where we repeat similar sounds at the end of lines that, create rhythmic patterns. Enjambment is one that I really like, and that's where the end of a line of poetry doesn't end and it just continues on to the next line without any pause. And then symbolism and repetition, obviously, again, symbolism, a lot of it, particularly in poems to add that depth and layers of interpretation, and repetition just to help create that rhythmic quality. You've also got theatrical techniques that you see in plays, mainly monologues and dialogues, so monologues being solo speeches and dialogues being conversations between characters. Soliloquies, which are quite similar to monologues, but it's where characters reveal their innermost thoughts and feelings to the audience. You've got costuming and makeup and props, and that's a really important one, especially in terms of what the background, scenes look like. And you've got irony, which is where there's a discrepancy between what's said and what's meant, and like appearance versus reality sort of situation. Now, we're nearly finished with all the techniques, but next to last, we have film techniques for all sorts of films, whether that's documentaries, docudramas, movies, as I said earlier. And your main film techniques are diegetic and non-diegetic sound, so the sound coming from the characters and the environment, and the sound that's added in the editing process, like music and other tunes. Lighting is another important one, which I've spoken about before, and then you've got camera angles and shots, because different angles, high angles, low angles, mid shots, long shots, panning shots, they all convey different perspectives. And finally, your backbone techniques. So you can refer to these as stylistic techniques, and what these are all the techniques you find in every single text. So these include narration, tense, sentence structure, tone, and more. And it's important for us to know our backbone techniques because, number one, you may very well be asked to speak about stylistic techniques as a question. And number two, it's because these are going to be what pull you out if a disaster strikes in your exam, since you can always rely on them if you can't find the right techniques within your unseen texts. Before we move to the second tip on, short answer questions, I cannot stress the importance of understanding the purpose of your techniques. As I've covered in the last episode, there are only 3 things a technique does. It emphasizes the point, engages the audience, or communicates information in a creative way. So make sure you can easily relate at least one of these 3 purposes that a technique is used to your techniques to make sure that, the next part is much easier. Now, for part 2 of this episode, I'll be taking you through how to structure your short answer questions. In terms of short answer questions that relate to one text only, no matter what the question is, you always start off by directly answering the question by flipping it and incorporating it into the first sentence of your response. For example, for the question, how does the poem explore the concept of connection? Answer by saying, the poem utilizes poetic techniques to convey connection as a permeating human experience. Permeating here meaning continuous, so add that word to your vocabulary. Quick side note, vocabulary is just as important as all your content that you learn. You may very well know your content like your name, but being able to present it in an artistic way is the real test. So start writing down all the words I teach you throughout these episodes and learn them. And before you say, I don't know how to learn or how would I do that, bonus episodes are making their way to teach you it all of it. Now, the way you're going to structure your normal single text short answer questions are, number 1, rephrase and repurpose the words in the question whilst making sure you answer it. Number 2, pick out quotes and their supporting techniques and explain exactly what they do to support the question. This is one in particular that I see students struggling with, but so long as you consistently refer back to the question, then you're doing it right. Remember, your goal is to answer why or how something is being done in a picture, news article, short story. By veering off and just explaining a quote in its own context, you're robbing yourself of marks that you may very well be accidentally dodging. Again, make sure you explain the relationship of the quote to the question. And number 3, link to the question by restating how the technique type, whether that be poetic, visual, written, allows us to do what the question asks. Last of all, let me walk you through how to write a comparative short answer question response. Yep, you heard that right. In section 1 of your English HSC Paper 1 exam, you'll also find 1 or 2 comparison questions that ask you to compare between texts about a particular theme, topic, idea, and here's how you're going to go about structuring that. You're still going to start off with answering the question directly by referring to the technique type in question, but what you're also going to do is bring in 2 main ideas that are shared between your texts so you can write about them. Then you write 2 body paragraphs. 1 body paragraph comparing between how the 2 texts convey main idea 1 using your supporting quotes, techniques, and their purpose, and another body paragraph comparing between how the 2 texts convey main idea 2 using your supporting quotes, techniques, and their purpose. Finally, make sure that the whole miniature essay, because they really are quite long responses, has a solid linking sentence at the end. Before I wrap up, I want to remind you all to learn your HSC terms and their meanings. Make sure you understand that explain means to show cause and effect. And, for example, analyze means to provide evidence and look deeper into the ideas. I will be posting out resources for everything we've covered today. A scaffold for your short answer questions, techniques flashcards, HSC terms flashcards and all. So keep your eyes peeled for that announcement when it comes. Thank you to everyone who has been engaging with these episodes, and I do hope they're serving my passion and purpose to help push out HSC content in a new and more modern way for you busy, hustling and overloaded HSCers. But that's it from me for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know if you have any questions about what we've covered today in the Q&A box attached to this podcast episode, and I'd be happy to discuss them in the very next episode. This is Sarah from the Marathon HSC podcast, and I will see you all back here tomorrow.